Hi, I'm Kevin Vanatta, owner of Newberry Motors, and you're watching Upper TV.
The black wolf of the Tahquamenon halted abruptly. His muzzle wrinkled, his lips curled back from his long white fangs, and a harsh, subdued snarl gathered in his throat. Just before him on the frozen river, parallel to the shore, a strange, broad trail broke the white, moon-flooded surface of the snow. A dragging trail, each footprint looking as if a giant beaver tail had been pressed down upon the snow. The drifts along the bank of the river were dry and soft. The wolf plunged into them to his shoulders at each step, whether he ran or trotted. Yet these strange broad tracks had sunk no deeper than the length of his muzzle. A man had passed here on snowshoes since the storm of the previous night. In all the winter wilderness there was no track the old wolf hated, as he hated that broad trail of the North Country men. Not before for 5 winters had he crossed such a trail in all the Tahquamenon country. Before that time, snowshoe tracks had laced the forest all one winter. Strange pellets of fat with the man smell bedded deeply in them had been buried in deer carcasses where such trails led past. Traps had spotted the country. He had found them buried at his feeding places and had scented them beneath the snow at his signal stations. And one by one the wolves of the Tahquamenon pack had disappeared. The black wolf had seen them lying stiff and cold on the ice near the poisoned deer carcasses, and had sensed that death, the great fear of the wilderness, was there. He had encountered other members of the pack snarling and fighting in the grip of heavy traps, and had swung off the trail and gone around them. That had been the winter of the deep snow, when food was scarce. The rabbits had died by the thousands in the summer swamps. Bad storms drove the deer south to the very edge of the clearings along the Henry to Yard, and the wolves ran gaunt and hungry from January to March. Lem Pollock had chosen that winter to wipe out the Tahquamenon pack, and the weeks of famine had made it an easy task. Finally, when only the black wolf remained of all the pack, he too had put a hindfoot between the jaws of a trap. In his struggles he had freed the chain from the clog, and weeks later the frozen, swollen leg had sloughed away at the knee, bone and all, leaving the red-eyed, hunger-crazed wolf free to hunt again, though a cripple for the remainder of his days. Toward spring, Pollock had died of pneumonia in his cabin above the big falls of the river. His traps still lay scattered through the swamps, rusted and harmless, now buried beneath tangles of fern and moss, bedded in dry spruce needles. Since then, no snowshoe trail had entered Tahquamenon country. Time after time, the black wolf had ranged outside this great tract of swamp and ridge and river, seeking others of his own kind. Especially in late winter, when the mating fever burned high in him, the desire for companionship lured him into distant country. But each time the presence of trappers in the strange territory had driven him back into his home range. Now the detested snowshoe trail had invaded Tahquamenon country once more. The black wolf slouched forward, put his muzzle down to the snow, and sniffed deeply at the broad tracks. The man had passed in late afternoon, probably shortly before dark. In all likelihood, he was camped for the night at Pollock's old cabin above the falls. The black wolf turned away from the trail, swung back into the timber. A quarter-mile down the river, he found a well-beaten deer runway crossing on the ice. Stepping in the deep tracks of the deer, he trotted out to the snowshoe trails, took scent of it again, snarling harshly, and went on across the river without stepping off the runway. He was beginning to conceal his tracks. Shortly past midnight, in a small deer yard on Linton Creek a mile back from the river, he pulled down a fawn and fed. When he had finished the meal, he dragged the fawn to the side of a tangled windfall, buried it deeply in the snow. Then he turned aside, halted at a little open spot among the spruce trees, and stood staring off in the direction of Pollock's old cabin on the river. The full January moon was high overhead. The still, snow-hung forest was almost as white as Fool Bay. Of a sudden, the black wolf put his lean muzzle up toward the brilliant cold stars, and the long-drawn, cadenced howl of the timber wolf rent the deep silence of the winter night. The echoes died away. The wolf stood like a black moon, carved shadow on the snow, his breath drifting above his shoulders in a silvery fog of frost. When no one came, when the stillness was unbroken over all the lonely country of the Tahquamenon, save that of the sharp pop of a hemlock trunk contracting in the bitter cold, the black wolf hauled again, turned abruptly, and trotted away to the west. In Lem Pollock's ancient snow-buried cabin above the big falls, Joe Kitchie had stirred out of his bunk to replenish his dying fire against the bitter cold of early morning that was biting through the log walls. On his knees before the stove, hewing shavings from a section of seasoned spruce, the first cadenced wolf howl reached him, faint with distance but clear in the frosty stillness. Unmindful of the cold, the trapper went to the door of the cabin, flung it open and stood listening. After a minute he heard, with a thrill of exultation, the second howl, rolling weirdly up from the swamp to the southwest. Kitchie had come into Tahquamenon country for the express purpose of trapping out this single survivor of the old pack. Tales of the crippled black wolf had filtered south. Stories of his single-handed raids on the deer in their winter yards, tales carried out by wandering timber cruisers and beaver poachers from the southern edge of the Tahquamenon country, until the lone wolf's fame had become almost legendary. Joe Kitchie was a seasoned wolfer and discounted the tales accordingly. He doubted that the wolf was even a cripple. That he was dark beyond the color of the average timber wolf, Kitchie did not credit at all. That he was slaughtering deer on the winter snows, the trapper had no cause to doubt. As for the story that he ranged alone, never hunting with another, the only wolf in all the Tahquamenon country, Kitchie hoped skeptically this might prove true. At daybreak he found the single wolf trail, meeting westward out of the Lenglu Creek swamp, and learned that at least one of the stories was not false. The wolf ran on 3 legs. 3 dawns later, the black wolf lay down for the day on top of a tangle of wind-fallen timber on the headwaters of the Two-Heart, 50 miles west as a raven flies from the trapper's cabin on the Tahquamenon. He had traveled steadily those 3 nights, crossing over from the Upper Tahquamenon to the south branch of the Two-Heart through the Martin Swamp, turning aside only for such hunting as came his way. It was here in the Upper Two-Heart country that the pack had found temporary refuge from men and traps in that winter of famine. For the last 15 miles of his journey, the black wolf had had neither sight nor scent of man or his trail, while the pale crescent of the waning moon climbed above the eastern spruce tops. Late that night, the black wolf halted on a timbered ridge at the edge of the Big Two-Heart swamp and pealed forth his quavering, blood-thinning howl. A minute of silence, and then, like an echo, across miles of swamp and ridge and river, an answer came, wailing, ringing faintly in the cold stillness of the winter night. For an awed minute, the black wolf stood quiet, straining ears and muzzle toward the distant call. Then he howled long and eloquently in return, lean muzzle uplifted, breath floating frostily in the pale moonlight. When the answer was given again, he melted into the dense timber of the swamp like a dark spectre. They met in the thickets of tag alder that fringed a beaver pond on the headwaters of the Two Heart. The black wolf and grey lady, the young she-wolf who was to be his mate. A shy meeting, standing apart at first while they scanned and scented each other with aloof yet friendly dignity. Finally, a fleet light touching of muzzles, and in the pallid radiance of the quarter moon, they pledged a troth and a comradeship that only death could break. After that, they frolicked together on the ice of the beaver pond, the first playtime the black wolf had known for 5 lonely years. 2 nights later, crossing the Two Heart some miles below the beaver pond, on a warm deer track with the black wolf leading, they came upon a snowshoe trail. They halted sharply in their running. The black wolf crept down to the broad tracks and took scent of them deeply, while Grey Lady lay down in the snow behind him, her red tongue lolling out from the effort of the chase. The trail was that of a man who had passed up the Tahquamenon 6 nights before. Instinct warned the black wolf that the trapper had followed him into the Two Heart country. The pair resumed their running and made their kill, timber wolf fashion, the black wolf lying in ambush behind a fallen log, while Grey Lady drove the panting, plunging doe downwind along the runway to him. When they were full fed, the black wolf swung away to the northeast, with Grey Lady trotting unquestioningly at his heels. They traveled steadily until daybreak. Then they lay down together for the day on the upturned roots of a fallen hemlock, where the wind would carry the scent and sound of any intruder who followed along their trail. At dusk they moved out again, still heading northeast. The 4th night they reached the headwaters of the Sheldrake, 25 miles north of the big falls of the Tahquamenon. They lingered on the Sheldrake for a week, then swung southward into the black wolf's home range. This was the old game of hide and seek that he knew so well how to play. As long as Joe Kitchie stayed upon his trail, the wolf would never remain for longer than a few days at a time in any district. Back and forth between the 3 rivers, he would make his great 100-mile circles, never on any regular schedule. So, finally, he would wear down the trapper's persistence, and wherever he went, Grey Lady would travel willingly at his side. That was the nature of their pact. As they came into Tahquamenon country, the black wolf began to display an unwanted alertness. Old instincts of craft and wariness awoke in him, to the bewilderment of his young mate. He no longer followed the hard-packed deer runways. Instead, he broke his own trail, plunging shoulder-deep into the dry snow. When Grey Lady would have turned aside and sought easier running on an old deer trail, he persuaded her to run at his heels again. He had learned in the winter of famine that men could walk in deer runways, planting traps in the deep hoofprints, and leave no sign. Once Grey Lady broke ahead of her mate, sniffed hungrily at the mound of snow that covered a deer carcass and began digging. Twice the black wolf touched her lightly on the shoulder with his muzzle, plainly pleading that she desist. Then, when the she-wolf continued to tear at the snow crust, he leaped at her suddenly, struck her shoulder to shoulder, knocking her away. Amazed and enraged, she regained her feet, stood snarling shrilly at him. The black wolf held his ground above the buried deer carcass, however, giving back snarl for snarl to his outraged mate. There was a savage insistence in his manner that could not be ignored, and at length, half understanding, Grey Lady yielded and followed him reluctantly away. The end of the month saw the 2 wolves swinging north toward the Sheldrake again. In that time, Kitchie had not come up with them, and they had seen no fresh snowshoe trails. They stayed in the Sheldrake country for 3 days and then began the long trek back to the she-wolf's home swamp at the headwaters of the Two Heart. They loitered there until Kitchi came over his scattered line of traps and poison stations in mid-February, driving them east to the Tahquamenon once more. Before they left the Two-Heart country, however, they began an orgy of killing that would mark their trails for the balance of the winter, against the great event that spring would bring them. Following the trail of the pair, Kitchi found 2 of their kills and swore savagely beneath his breath. "Getting ready to den," he told himself. "They'll do some real killing from now till spring." By the middle of March, more than a score of deer carcasses lay scattered over the wolves' range on the 3 rivers. Wherever they denned, there would be no dearth of food in their lair in the days when Grey Lady could not hunt. As the weeks passed, and each day brought fresh evidence of the uncanny cunning of the crippled wolf, Joe Kitchi began to despair of ever outwitting him. "I'll never get him with traps or pills," Kitchi told himself moodily one night as he sat smoking before his fire in Lem Pollock's old cabin on the Tahquamenon. "Nor her either, as long as they run together." Finally, at the end of February, the trapper went down to the clearings on the Henry and was gone for 10 days. When he returned, 3 gaunt mongrel hounds trailed at his heels. Kitchi prayed for one final fall of deep light snow before the end of winter. The last of March saw his hopes fulfilled. With the Black Wolf and Grey Lady trailing into the Tahquamenon country from the Sheldrake in the face of a late winter blizzard. The she-wolf was growing heavy now, ranging little. She followed her mate reluctantly on his long runs. She preferred to spend her time nosing about windfalls, looking for snug caves, exploring hollow fallen logs. Instinct and experience from the old days of the pack warned the Black Wolf that their days of running were nearly at an end for that winter. For 3 days, while the dry snow eddied down endlessly between the tree trunks, blown in gusty blasts by the wind, the 2 wolves lay in a snug shelter beneath a windfall in a dense cedar swamp a mile back from the big falls. The storm blew itself out on the 3rd afternoon, and at dusk that night, ravenously hungry, they moved out from their shelter. Grey Lady ran reluctantly, and when the Black Wolf surprised and pounced upon a snowshoe rabbit, in its form beneath a low balsam tree, shortly after they left the windfall, he stood quietly aside while his mate devoured the morsel. The she-wolf ate greedily, repaying his chivalry with suspicious, churlish snarls. Shortly past midnight, they crossed a fresh deer trail, floundering in the deep new snow. When the Black Wolf swung into the trail, running silently, ears laid back, Grey Lady failed to come into stride at his heels. Instead, she followed the trail slothfully, falling steadily behind, and from his experience in the pack days, the Black Wolf knew he would have no help with the kill that night. Within an hour, unaided, he drove the doe out of the swamp into a belt of hardwood, and then, when the quarry began to show signs of tiring in the soft snow, the Black Wolf gave tongue as he ran, guiding Grey Lady cross-country to the chase. He overtook and pulled down the deer within a mile, and the she-wolf joined him a half-hour later, vixenish and tired, snarling fretfully as she fed beside him. The going was hard, and they traveled less than a mile after they left the kill, lying down for the day on snow, buried fallen spruce tree. In his cabin on the river, rejoicing in the deep fall of dry snow, Joe Kitchi heard, in the early morning silence 3 hours before dawn, the trail cry of a timber wolf. A thrill of exultation ran through the trapper. He was to have his chance at last. He left the cabin at daybreak, trailed by the 3 gaunt hounds. Less than a mile to the west, he found the trail where the crippled wolf had run the deer. He followed it, compelling the hounds to heel. At the scene of the kill, the tracks of the she-wolf came in, and Kitchi smiled in grim satisfaction. The weather and the wolves had played into his hands together at last. Not until he reached the place where the wolves had bedded down did he release the 3 hounds upon the double trail. He had run timber wolves on deep, fresh snow before, and he knew that success depended upon having fresh dogs to pit against a fresh wolf. The Black Wolf and Grey Lady fled from their beds only when the wind brought them word of the silent approach of the trapper, less than a half-mile away. They gained a brief lead before the hounds were freed, and at the first outburst of baying along their double trail, they separated, each taking his own desperate chances single-handed against the dogs in the fashion of their kind. By instinct, Grey Lady swung westward toward her home country on the Two Heart. The Black Wolf headed north toward the Sheldrake, wallowing in the soft snow. There was no chance that both would outdistance the hounds, and he knew it. A mile ahead of the dogs, the crippled wolf heard them hesitate briefly at the divided trail. Then the baying chorus was away again, turning to the west. The Black Wolf changed his course like a deflected arrow, swinging in a wide circle to intercept the chase. Well ahead of the hounds, he came upon his mate's labored trail, ran in it for a quarter mile while he regained his breath, led away again on an angle to the north. Again he heard the dogs pause at the split trail. Again the baying was resumed, continued westward. Twice more the Black Wolf repeated this maneuver, losing precious ground each time, striving desperately to lure the hounds onto his own trail. Instinct, however, seemed to tell the dogs that easier quarry ran ahead. Perhaps they read from the trail telltale signs of the tiring of the she-wolf. At any rate, they would not be turned aside, and when the Black Wolf came between them and his mate for the 3rd time, there was no chance to try again. The dogs were less than a quarter mile behind him now, and just ahead, in plain sight through the timber, his mate ran wearily, sinking to the flanks at each bound. No use now to split the trail again, no hope that he could turn the hounds from their quarry. But one way remained if the she-wolf was to reach the distant Two Heart. He had known from the beginning that both of them could not outdistance the bellowing dogs. Behind an upturned stump along Grey Lady's trail, the Black Wolf dropped down in ambush. The dogs were strung out, and the leader ran to his death alone, unknowing and unswerving. The Black Wolf leaped as he had leaped at deer on their runways, slashing the hound's throat open with clipping fangs before the dog could check his headlong running. Then the Black Wolf stood at bay against the stump, and the 2 remaining dogs closed in, worrying him, baying as at a treed cat, but keeping just beyond his reach. A mile away, Kitchi heard the new tone of the chase and broke into a shuffling run on his snowshoes. For long, maddening minutes, the 2 hounds taunted the cornered wolf, falling back deftly as he flashed out at them, seeking to lure him away from the protection of the stump. This was an old game to them. They knew they had only to hold him there, tantalizing him, goading him to defiance until the trapper could come up. Of the craft of this wolf, they knew nothing. Gradually, as they fought, he let himself be decoyed from his place of safety behind the stump. The leader of the hounds slipped suddenly behind him, nipping at his flanks, and the Black Wolf lost footing, went down as if under the attack. Suddenly forgetful of their caution, the 2 dogs were upon him, cutting and slashing. With a single twist, supple and swift as a striking snake, the Black Wolf regained his feet, pounced like a falcon upon the nearest hound. He caught the dog by the throat, bore it down, and held it while his long fangs searched for and found the life stream. As the stricken dog staggered up, 4 crimson jets staining the snow a dozen feet away, the wolf wheeled upon its mate, worrying at his heels. In the face of his malignant snarl, the heart of the hound turned craven. He whirled and fled along the back trail, and Joe Kitchi came in sight 100 feet away, just too late. The black wolf was behind the stump in a single swift leap, melted into the thickets before the trapper could lift his rifle. In the brief glimpse he caught of the fleeing wolf, Joe Kitchie learned that another of the legends told in the clearings along the Henry was true. The lone wolf of the Tahquamenon was black as a fisher.